Hello, and welcome to my channel. Today, I added, first of all, some new animations, or an animation, to the first boss fight. The run animation. So fast. Oh yeah, not only did I add the running animation, which let me run around here so you can actually see it. It's fucking so hard. So there he is, running at me. One thing that I'm not sure about is if you look closely, you can see that the sword is actually under his helmet. Actually, you can see it right there. So yeah, his sword is under the helmet, and that's because we do this thing where so that enemies can look in different directions, and same with the player. Like every character in the game, their head is separate from their body. So the body sprite looks something like this. Okay, so you can see the sword is there, but then you put the helm on top, and then the sword gets covered up. So I think it looks a little weird because I didn't mean for it to be like up against his neck. He's supposed to be holding it over his shoulder. So what I'm probably gonna do is go in and just edit. Like if I just layer the head on top of the body, and then I can just like cut out the sword underneath and paste it on top. So basically just put the sword as part of the head sprite. Because when he's running at you, he doesn't need to be looking around anyway. So he'll always look straight forward, and that way it'll match along with the sword as it's resting there. So I'll probably do that later on. So yeah, that was one thing. And then the other one was trails when he dashes. To give it a cool effect. You can see when he's dashing now, there's a trail that gets left behind him. I don't know if my camera's fast enough to even capture it. Probably. Let's see. Yeah, you can kind of see it. But yeah. Getting the pacing of the run animation correct was a little tricky too. I think it's good though. If only he didn't kill me so damn fast. Yeah, I think it works. I think I got the pacing right. Okay, so anyway, that was one thing. And then the other thing was I was looking again at the external area, the exterior, for the second act and how we're going to do that. So yeah, I'm still happy with it. I just implemented some functionality for how this is actually going to work, just to make sure that it's all good before I ask Amanda to go ahead and make the assets for this. So two things were involved with this. One is to have the top part of the building fade out when you walk up. So as you can see, that works now. Not only when you walk up, but then also when you look further, it'll fade out. And also if you're looking at the whole map all at once, it'll also fade out. So yeah, it's working. And the other thing was the door. So one of the problems in the previous levels, you can't see the front door. It's actually covered by like a roofing over top, but you can see the door on the other side. So now in this act, it's the opposite. I want to have the door up front here, and the back door in the room will be covered up. Now, the problem with that is my doors, when you smash through them, the debris is spawned on the opposite end of the doors. So actually, let me just quickly show. Like here, there's always two doors, right? So when you smash through this, all the debris and stuff gets spawned here, so that it comes out in a way that looks like it makes more sense. And it also creates for greater effect, because if I spawn the debris on the closer side, it doesn't go as far, and then it kind of like sits around here, which doesn't look as good. And then the door is locked behind, so you can't even see it. But anyway, yeah, and then you dash through it so quickly that the effect is effectively... I mean, it looks as if you went through the door anyway, so it works, is my point. But yeah, but here, and then you can see here too, right? The front door is covered up, so it just smashes through here. So that does not look good in this case, where you're smashing through this door and you don't see what's on the other end. And so because of that, it just looks like this door literally disappears and there's no debris at all. So I fixed that by adding some functionality to the doors so that I can custom decide for each door on which side to spawn the debris. So now it looks okay. So now you can see that the debris smashes there, and the slow-mo kind of happens through the roof entrance here, which I think is pretty cool. And then you see some of the debris come out here. So I think it's working well. So I'm very happy and excited for that. It's looking good. I was just thinking, I did notice, and this is a very minor thing, one of those things most people will probably never even notice, but I did notice because of the way I set this up, that if you're looking closely, like if you just watch the doors when you smash through it, this door literally just disappears and you see the smoke and stuff come through this one. So I'm wondering if I should add, now that I added this functionality where I can define which side to put it on, I'm wondering if I should at least add smoke to both sides. Like watching it, you can see your guy kind of just goes through and it opens automatically. But I don't know. Like no one's... The effect works though, because in practice no one's going to be looking at, like staring at the door as they go through it, unless they are curious how I did this. You can see if you watch like the opposite end of the door, it looks great. Like that's where it looks perfect. You smash right through it. But if you're watching that first door, it kind of just opens, suddenly disappears. But if I do, just to give an example, like if I grab this door, if I set it to spawn debris on both sides, you can see there how it like creates the smoke and stuff on the front side too. Covers it up a bit better. Way better, I would say. So I might make it, just because it covers it up better, I might just make it so like don't spawn the debris, but just spawn that extra bit of smoke. Either that, or maybe do spawn it on both sides, but just cut the amount of pieces spawned in half. Because that's the only problem with this, is it spawns twice as many pieces, and then it looks kind of like maybe a bit too much. Alright. Anyway. In fact, let me quickly make a note of that. Alright. And switch that off. Okay. That was most of the work I did, and then I was just looking at I can barely see this. My crappy paint job about I was just brainstorming ideas for the third level. And one of the things that's tricky is, so my philosophy with the level design is I always try to mix up the shapes of the levels and to try something, just like how with each new enemy type I try to design them in a way that creates something new and fresh as you progress through the game. I wanted the levels to always be introducing something new as well, at least in terms of their layout. So the tricky thing is I'm kind of limited because I don't think there's a way that makes sense where I could make, for example, I was showing how, I might as well just show it, how in the second level here, I made this design that's kind of like a circle, but there's the one big room in the middle. And I feel like my ideal version of this would actually be to not have one in the middle, make the whole thing just one big loop. But I think artistically it's just really weird to have a gap in the middle. I don't know. Like, why would a building just have one one big pillar in the middle? I don't really like that. And then I was thinking, in the third act of the game, which is going to actually take place outdoors in a temple ruins setting, that might work, because that can be, you can have blocked off areas that are maybe just overgrowth or something like that. So I was thinking maybe that'll be the gimmick that I'll reserve for Act 3 that makes the levels a little more interesting that way, because without being able to block out an area, it does restrict my designs, where technically every area is always going to be, or like every design is always going to be just some kind of connection of like different shaped rooms that all form a single block, right? So I can switch up the directions of the levels. Like here, I was thinking of one that starts off with you going to the right, and then you go up some staircase, and this will be a big second floor that'll make up most of the level. And then to mix it up, I was thinking like you come down and you have one last room at the end. So this was sort of the unique idea I came up for this level, which is I'm always thinking also about how you can have optimal paths to go through a level. I want there to always be at least a few different possibilities of paths you can take going through the rooms in order to get the best possible time, or at least just to never have to repeat a room. So because of that, I tend to avoid dead ends, but I was thinking maybe a unique thing I can do for this level is intentionally have a dead end, and where the goal is to have multiple paths that are optimal because they all lead you to this same last room here, which then always leads you to this final room on the opposite end on the bottom floor. Because I haven't done anything like that. So anyway, just the idea of having a dead end I thought would be something interesting to try, and to design most of the optimal paths around getting to a specific room instead. Yeah, anyway, just some thoughts on that. I'll keep thinking about this some more tomorrow. Now, in terms of other thoughts I got another one of those Discord marketing dudes trying to sell me on his ability to sell my game. Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, I was reading a story today about EA. EA being bought out by some private owners, some equity firm, and people were complaining about leveraged buyouts and how this is going to screw over the company, and then the employees are going to get fired and all this kind of stuff, which seemed to be mostly about people not understanding how this stuff works. But the thing that it got me thinking about a situation where, because I started reading about this and I was curious about what the point of these kinds of buyouts of companies is. And in a lot of cases, apparently these buyouts can be for companies that are struggling, but that a firm thinks has potential. So they buy it out, take it over, do the equivalent of renovating it, where they try to expand it and get it going again. And then hopefully it does really well, and then they take it public again several years later, and that's how they make their money back. So in that case, I feel like that's all well and good, because if it was a company that was already failing anyway, they're just helping the company. But in cases where a company's already doing well, because this is the thing about these buyouts, is when they buy it out, they pay for some of it themselves, but then they take a loan to pay for the rest of it. And the loan and the debt for that loan is placed on the company, not the guys who bought it. So what's happening with EA here apparently is these guys are paying like $30 billion out of their own money, and then about $20 billion was paid for via a loan. And now EA has $20 billion of debt because they take on the debt of that loan, even though it was this firm that took the loan out to buy the company. And that's where people are like, that's bullshit and that's terrible and whatever, which Really, I mean, that's just how all business loans work in some sense. I mean, if you start your own company and you get a business loan, like you put it in the name of the company, you don't personally take the debt on so that you don't lose your house or whatever if the company goes under. But in a situation like EA, where I imagine, I could be wrong about this, but in some situations where I'm sure this happens, there can be companies that are actually doing fine. They don't have any debt. And then a company comes in and does this, and the owner sells it to them. They make a bunch of money, but now that company has debt. I was thinking about how like how the risk distribution works in this case, because a lot of people who are into entrepreneurial stuff always argue that people who complain about these things, they don't understand how the owners of a company are the ones who take on the risk, and that is why they also get the most reward. And I think that makes sense generally speaking, but I feel like it gets weird when you start thinking in relative terms instead of absolutes. So for example, in my situation here, I'm spending a ton of my own money to make this game. And there's a huge risk involved because if it fails, that goes entirely on me. I'm just screwed. And I'll be broke. But the people working for me will be fine. They make money doing the work that I asked them to do. They get paid no matter what. And if the game fails, like, I mean, it sucks, but they don't lose anything. And they still got paid. Whereas I get absolutely nothing. So there's effectively zero risk on their part and a whole lot for me. But if instead they were my employees, because these are all freelancers, but if I was employing them and their job working for me was their only source of income, and rather than me investing all of my money, I'm only using a loan, or I'm a super rich guy with tons of diversified investments, and if my company fails, it's just like, yeah, it sucks, but I'm not like broke now or anything like that. I have other sources of income, whatever. Well, now the risk kind of isn't the most for me. In some sense, the risk is like, if you think about all their combined jobs of my workers, them losing their jobs, if the company goes under, them all losing their jobs and their only source of income is a way bigger risk for them, arguably, than the company going under for me. For me, it's just a loss of like some percentage of my revenue, maybe. So I was just thinking about how, in general, it seems like there's, in cases of bigger businesses and with people who have a ton of money, while I agree when you first start something out, and especially in a case where, like, when you're taking that risk or you take out a loan or whatever, it's helping to stimulate the business. You're investing it back into the business to expand. You're probably making new jobs and things like that, and that's good for everyone. But in a case like one of these buyouts where you're not necessarily creating anything new, at least not at the time of that debt being taken on, and there's a huge risk involved, and the owners are now being paid a shit ton of money for this, and they're now good no matter what, especially in like a buyout like this. I was thinking, like, you own a studio especially, and you sell it to some bigger company, and you as the owner make millions of dollars, and no matter what happens now, you're good. You got your payoff for taking the risk. But your employees now, best case scenario, they're probably in the same situation they've always been in. Worst case scenario, they lose their jobs. So there's a certain point of growth at which it starts to feel like workers actually start to take on as much, if not in some ways more risk than the owners do, after the owner has already received a certain amount of payout for the risk that they took. And based on that, it feels to me like there should be some kind of automatic regulation of, and like, this is obviously where unions then come into play. And it feels to me like there's a certain point at which, I don't know, which we should have regulations for workers automatically getting certain protections and rights once a company gets to a certain level of growth and profit and so on. And that owners can't just go and unilaterally make decisions that will enormously enrich them while putting their workers at risk. I don't know. That seems fair. I mean, if you're going to make the argument that this is all about risk taking, then it seems just as reasonable to say that, to point out that at a certain point, the actual risk takers become your employees, or at least it becomes like 50-50 between the workers and the employees. So the owner is only getting like all of the reward there doesn't seem to make much sense anymore. And yeah, anyway, just a thought I had. And also, I was thinking the same thing about other kinds of public services, or like things that seem almost like they should be a public service at this point. Like they outgrow their original private origin. And specifically, I was thinking about things like social media websites, like a Twitter or a YouTube or whatever. These things are such cultural mainstays now, and they're so incredibly crucial to interacting with others that, again, at a certain point, it feels like it outgrows it being just a private company, and it's almost, I don't know, like a fucking private service, or like a public service, I should say. Um, like specifically thinking back to when Donald Trump got kicked off of Twitter, that feels like the kind of thing where, like, it's just kind of crazy to think that people who play, like, whether you like him or not, people who play an important role in culture, in politics, whatever, who use a certain platform to talk to most people and to reach an audience, can, at the whim of a completely private company, suddenly be shut down. And in the case maybe of someone like him, it's not as big of a deal because, okay, he has enough money, he goes and makes, which he did, makes his own platform or whatever. But for the average person, if you end up getting censored for whatever reason, you have no recourse, and you're effectively shut out from something that huge amounts of people are participating in, and which effectively, arguably, feels like being shut out of a public forum, which, if it was actually a public forum, it would generally be regulated in some way, and unless you are doing something exceptionally disruptive, not just expressing your opinion, which you're allowed to do and is the whole point of it, but you're like, I don't know, just spamming or some shit like that, that would be protected. Like if you go, I don't know, in a lot of public spaces, like I think in libraries and stuff like that, you go and you hold some kind of conference or whatever about your little group, your own opinions and stuff like that. There's a lot of protections and regulations there for what you're allowed to do. Um, at least as far as I know. I remember back when in Toronto there was some controversy once when some like feminist group was going to hold a meeting of some sort at the public library, and it was like feminists versus I don't know, like trans rights groups, and so like the controversy was because there was a lot of protests from like trans rights activists against these feminists holding this meeting at this library, and the librarian had to make this decision about following their policy and the idea that like libraries are meant to be open to the public to have conversations and exchanges of ideas and whatever, and that they can't just like disregard their own policy on that and shut this feminist group down just because another group doesn't like it. I can't remember what even happened or what came of that exactly, but anyway, my point is having it as an actual publicly designated space creates a lot more protection and regulations for everyone to be able to discuss and exchange their ideas as much as they want. Whereas when things are open privately, well, now it's just whether or not the owners of these companies decide whether or not you're allowed to say these things. And worst of all, of course, is that, and this is another difference as well, is that anything they don't like seeing, if they decide for some reason to censor things, especially things that are not favorable to them, they'll have the power to do that. Whereas with the government, obviously government can abuse that too, but usually there's at least somewhat more transparency and public discourse about what the regulations on that should be and to what extent the government is allowed to make any decisions about that. Especially in somewhere like the United States, where obviously with the First Amendment, there's a hell of a lot of protections there. Canada, not as much, but but it is what it is. So, yeah, I don't know. I just thought this was interesting because it makes me think also of the relationship with artwork in general and when you put it out there. Because I was talking yesterday about the whole thing with, you know, these private servers in World of Warcraft and people taking it and turning it into their own thing and everything. And it's like the same with any artwork. Like I don't know, you really just anything. You release any kind of artistic work, and a group of people might cling on to it, and they love it for some reason, and maybe it has nothing to do with why you originally made it. And but because of that, there's a way where you put something out into the world, and it's not really yours anymore. It becomes everyone's. The public can use it however they want, and that comes with a lot of complications. And I feel like the same thing goes for with companies that get too big. They're not, it's weird to think of it at a certain point as just like this thing where this one guy's taking a risk on and doing, working with other people, when it's like, this is now when you've got like 100,000 people working for you and you're like a million times richer than them. Like, this is almost more like a public thing now. It's weird to think of it as private. And same with, at least entirely, I'm not, saying government should nationalize every big company or anything like that, but just that there seems like there needs to be much more balance at a certain point. And the same goes with companies that take a role, not even when it comes to profit, but that just take a role about playing a huge part in public conversations, like on Twitter and YouTube and so on. I mean, I would prefer that no conversations happen on those dog shit websites, which I say as I make these YouTube videos. But if they're going to be a big part of the culture, well, it seems kind of weird that a bunch of private corporations get like 100% ownership over all of it, and the rest of us also. It's like not even about censorship and stuff. It's also things like, because of this, we have no fucking clue. How do these algorithms work? Like, how, you know what I mean? What are even the rules at all? There's all the time people complaining about, like, you have no idea why something's monetized, why it's not, whatever. And these are all the kinds of things that feel like they would have big conversations and maybe would be able to get somewhere better if it was actually, at least to some degree, publicly regulated and controlled. Hell, I guess that's supposed to be the role of things like the CRTC, I think, in Canada, and the FTC in the US. Maybe they just need to catch up with the times and make some regulations for these kinds of sites in the first place, at least if they get big enough, Maybe if you have a social media site, you get to 100,000 users or something, there's certain regulations you have to follow about what protections people have for what they're allowed to say and all that kind of stuff. All right. I'm done for tonight. Peace.